Hey, have you heard? Jack's back. Again, after coming back 3 years ago from a 13-year hiatus. The timing is a little weird. You'd think they'd want to capitalize while Season 5 was still fresh, but I'm not going to complain. I mean, it's been a long time since Samurai Jack's gotten a game. Developed by Soleil and published by Adult Swim Games, Samurai Jack Battle Through Time looked promising on its initial reveal. All the original voice cast were coming back to reprise their roles, and they even got the original creator on board to help with the story. Now, licensed games aren't usually that highly regarded. I don't think that's a controversial statement. We've all played our fair share of shovelware, but I've also played a handful of licensed games that are among some of my favorites. Astro Boy Omega Factor, Dragon Ball Advance Adventures, Turtles in Time, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, all games I've gone back to numerous times. The license doesn't matter, the source is just an inspiration for what the game might have in store for you. I just needed to see something that made Jack worth checking out, and as we approached release that happened. Adult Swim showed off a trailer demonstrating some more advanced techniques in the game. I was never sure how deep the combat system went as I wasn't studying the game before launch, but now I could tell at the very least it wasn't a brainless button masher. Come release day, I ended up getting it on the Switch. Yeah, the Switch version is a little rough, runs at 30 FPS instead of 60. In certain areas it drops frames and resolution can get a bit blurry when there's too many enemies populating the screen, but overall it's fine. I would say buy another version if you can, but if Switch is your preferred or only option then don't sweat it. I did try portable mode for a bit, and while I can't give you a professional comparison of that, it seemed to run and look about the same, which was a bit surprising. Out of curiosity, I wanted to look up what Soleil has made, also I'm not sure if I'm saying their name correctly, hopefully I am. And all I could come up with is 3 games, including Samurai Jack. One being Ninjala, which I believe is liked by a lot of people. I played it for a little bit, and I thought it was cute, but couldn't really get into it. And Naruto to Boruto Shinobi Strikers, which I'm pretty sure has bad reviews. But the Steam page seems pretty positive, so maybe it's just one of those things that it's for the fans get it, the media doesn't. Also, it seems like they're a subsidiary of Valhalla Game Studios. Alright, let's see what they've done. You know, maybe looking into this wasn't the best idea after all. Anyway, let's talk about the game. Samurai Jack Battle Through Time is an action-adventure hack and slash. Think of games like Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, a little bit of Sekiro, probably some others, but you get the point. Like those games, fighting enemy hordes often vastly outnumbered is the main focus. You have light and strong attacks you could chain together for combos, blocking and dodging to stay defensive, and a solid amount of mobility to keep the action fast-paced. The D-pad lets you cycle through 4 weapons on the fly. Spears, hammers, and even your fists are options, all with different movesets and attributes such as speed and strength, though they are all fairly similar in terms of execution. Wasn't a big fan of hammers, but I was constantly switching between swords and fists with the occasional spear to mix it up. You even get bows and guns to give Jack long-range options. At first the combat felt a bit stiff, but by the end of the first world you should have it all down. Early on enemies die pretty effortlessly, but as the game starts throwing more enemies at you on top of increasing their health, the fights do get more engaging, though not without some issues. It's really easy to get blindsided if you aren't paying attention, and enemies love to block your attacks, seemingly without any tell or reason why, which can just set you up for failure if you're mashing. Be careful with locking on too. After defeating an enemy, you won't auto-lock onto the next enemy. I'm not really sure how they missed that during playtesting since that's a pretty common feature in action games. Hopefully that gets patched in though. Throughout the game, you'll be able to upgrade Jack to have more abilities such as parrying, double jumps, new combo enders. Probably the coolest skill is the instant guard, which lets you cancel your attacks into guard, which on its own is insanely helpful. Trust me, enemies often don't care about your attacks and will rip into you for it. But it also lets you create custom combos and essentially never-ending attack strings if you pull it off correctly. There's a lot of stuff on this skill tree. In fact, there's so much stuff that I'm pretty sure it's impossible to earn everything on one playthrough. You'll be picking up skill points that are used specifically on the skill tree, and while the blue skill points are easily found, Bushido points are not. So there's just going to be times where you have to save up if you want to continue getting the upgrades you desire. There's also special items like diamonds and rubies that you also need for the skill tree. So you need skill points, Bushido points, special items, and on top of that there's also gold as the world's currency. Gold is used for a lot of things, too many things. It's actually kind of stressful how much gold is required in this game. Scattered in the levels is the samurai who acts as the shop. He sells general items like heals, ammos for ranged weapons, and even revives, but you also need to spend money to upgrade your weapons, and these cost a lot. Just like the skills, you aren't going to be able to get all the upgrades to your weapons because the prices are too high for how much gold you find throughout the levels. On top of that, you'll also need gold to repair your weapons because there's weapon durability in this game. Some weapons are extremely fragile, which will just make you not want to use them. Others aren't so bad, but when gold is so tight, I'm just going to be sticking to my swords and fists, which you don't have to repair. One solution to dealing with this is to steal enemy weapons. If you get into this habit, you won't have to worry about repairing much and you could just let those weapons break. But the resource management goes a bit too far and adds a level of stress that doesn't really feel intentional. Neither the skill system or gold on their own would be that bad, and I really don't have an issue with the skills. Other action games have skill sets that can't be fully unlocked on one playthrough, but when you're constantly looking at both points and gold in your inventory and just realize that you can't afford jack shit, it's a bummer. So yeah, combat's good. Skill tree and currency have some issues, but this is Samurai Jack. The cartoon had nice action, but what about the writing, the characters, the jokes, the emotional moments, all these things that made the show what it was? What is this game even about? Well, not much. If you were expecting a solid story follow-up to the cartoon or maybe some kind of lost episode, temper your expectations. At the beginning of the game, you are put directly at the end of Season 5, and when I say directly, I mean you're literally watching the cartoon. Instead of going back to the past to stop Aku, Aku sends Jack into some between-time world where he's got to fight his way through old enemies and mind-controlled allies in order to finally stop Aku and reunite with Ashi. Essentially, this is a way for them to have the player relive the show, but not as a recap, even though it basically is. It's like an alternate ending to the show, but there's very little substance since the stories within the levels are almost non-existent. That brief summary is basically all that happens throughout the game. It's honestly pretty disappointing. Don't get me wrong, it's really nice to see all these old locations, and the art style captures the show fantastically. Aku City is perfect, in my opinion. Sometimes the game shifts to 2D, which does affect gameplay, but also adds a cinematic feel at times, like in the cemetery for instance. Same goes for the enemies and friends you meet along the way. They translated the 2D cartoon into 3D models extremely well, but it just feels like something's missing. Here's a big issue I have with the game overall, the lack of voice acting. They went through the trouble of hiring all the voice actors, but if the characters aren't in a cutscene, they aren't fully voiced. Rothschild, for instance, has one line in the beginning of the game, and then every time you see him, he'll say a short one-liner separate from the text until the very end of the game where he shows up for one more cutscene. And this is true for every NPC you run into. A cartoon character is defined by their voice. You need to hear them to connect with them correctly. The delivery for what is voiced is great, but why is it so limited? Sadly, it just makes their encounters more forgettable, and on top of an already bare story, it leaves you really wanting more. Even the music is just kinda there. It fits, but it's nowhere near the level of the cartoon. At the time of recording this video, I also couldn't find the soundtrack anywhere online. No one's uploaded it. When you're not in combat, you'll be doing some light platforming and puzzle solving. The exploration is definitely appreciated. It's nice to find side paths and get rewarded with items for doing so in a game like this, but it often doesn't last very long, and you're right back into the action. The levels chosen do a good job at being visually distinct from each other, but the heavy focus on combat definitely makes it so they all feel a bit too similar. I never found any level to be a drag to get through, though likewise none of them really stood out above the rest either. Boss fights are pretty cool, some aren't so hot, but most offer a fun challenge. The game did Damongo kinda dirty though. You fight this guy, no joke, like 5 or 6 times throughout the story, and all his fights boil down to is an enemy rush where you have to smack orbs dropped by the enemies into him. I understand that this is on brand for Damongo considering his soul absorption ability from the show, but the fight doesn't feel any different. I've been fighting these same enemies all game, so it's just not very interesting. I do want to point out this game's hard mode, as I wasn't expecting much from it at first, but I was pleasantly surprised to find that hard mode offered a very different experience. Damage values are changed as expected, but you also have to fight way more enemies, making the fights that much more hectic. They also mix up enemy variety as early as level 1. The best example I can give you is in the cemetery. Normally this room here is just an enemy gauntlet. You beat them, then you fight a bigger enemy, and then you can leave. But on hard mode, they throw in Damongo. I mean, yeah, I complained about him, but I'm just trying to say that they spent the time to go through each level on separate difficulties to change your experience, and that's worth pointing out. Given some more time, some more budget, this game could have definitely been special. There's a fun time to be had here. I liked playing it, but it's hard to recommend in its current state. I wanted more fan service. Samurai Jack Battle Through Time reminds you that Samurai Jack was in fact a popular show, but never capitalizes on what made it so popular in the first place. If you're on the fence, wait for a sale in my opinion. My playthrough, which consisted of swapping between normal and hard mode, took about 6 to 7 hours to complete, and I don't feel like I'm missing out on much by not immediately jumping back in for more. If you've never watched Samurai Jack, then I'm not really sure this game has much to offer you at all. Check out the cartoon, then come back and watch some gameplay. Anyway, that'll do it for me. Thanks for watching. Until next time.